is leading to a lot of floods, and it is affecting many children, which is very devastating, and it is causing trauma and so many other issues, hindering children an opportunity to education and their rights. So the 1.1 Too High campaign is here to support and bring up urgent support to all the children, because we cannot be just waiting here because we are at 1.1 degrees right now. We cannot be waiting until it gets to 1.5 degrees as it is agreed. So we want to start bringing or making a change right now. So 1.1 Too High program is here to bring urgent support to the children who are facing problems, issues because of global warming or because of climate change. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Blessed. This was a campaign that started by the African Committee of Experts. As Blessed indicated, the goal of the Paris Agreement, which is to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, does not respond to the plight of African children, because in the current 1.1 degree warming, millions of African children across the continent are already facing the brunt of the climate crisis. So urgent action is needed, and that's what the committee has been saying for the past few years. And we're very glad that this campaign is resonating with African children and that they're taking it forward. Following this, I'd like to take you a bit to take you through the report of the study that the committee undertook, because we have a child-friendly version of the report that will be distributed, I believe, right? Or is it already on the desk? I think you can access the the child-friendly version of the report as you leave the event, but you can also find the full report of the study, the continental study that we did on the impact of climate change on children's rights in Africa. But maybe in just 5 minutes, I would like to give you a highlight of the areas that the report of the study covers. The study highlights some of the key findings of the study, highlights the ways in which the different impacts of children, the climate change on children in Africa, are connected to their different rights in the Charter. So when it comes to the health impacts of climate change, the study highlighted that the increase in the spread of vector-borne and waterborne diseases such as malaria that previously already impact children disproportionately, are exacerbated because of the impact of climate change. This includes dengue fever, malaria, and other vector-borne and waterborne diseases that respond to warming temperature, that respond positively to warming temperature and increase their rates of presence in the continent. In addition to these vector-borne and waterborne diseases, we also have eco-anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder that is increasing among African children who are affected by various slow onset and sudden events such as droughts and floods and cyclones across the continent. And this is directly linked to their right to health. When it comes to the nutrition crisis, the climate crisis exacerbates the already existing food insecurity in the continent, which affects more than 45 million children through stunting and malnutrition. 58% of children under 5 in Africa already suffer from stunted growth due to chronic malnutrition, and this is expected to worsen due to the impact of climate change. When it comes to violence and exploitation, economic hardships that are caused by impacts of climate change, such as child labor and trafficking, are increasing due to the impacts of climate change. But in addition to that, there's also evidence that harmful practices such as female genital mutilation and child marriage are also increasing because these are being used as coping mechanisms when families and communities lose their livelihoods and means of survival. Education, the impacts of climate change lead to the direct impacts are usually the destruction of schools, closure of schools because of heat waves or floods or various climatic events, and also low educational attainment because of high temperature. A lot of regions in the continent, if you look at the Sahel region, the temperature throughout the year is 40 degrees and above. And in this kind of temperature, which is getting warmer and warmer every year, it's very difficult for children, of course, to sit in school and listen and understand what's being taught and be able to achieve the educational attainment that we want them to achieve. So this is the various ways in which education is impacted. It also leads to forced displacement of communities, which results in disruption of education. When children are displaced within their country, but sometimes across the borders of their country, their education is interrupted, and usually they don't go back to education, they drop out. Conflicts and migration. Millions are already being forcibly displaced because of climate disaster. And we have a speaker from Amnesty International who will tell us more about child or displacement in the climate crisis and in relation to financing. So I will not say much on that. We have also seen that the impact of climate change exacerbates conflicts in the region. If you look at conflicts in various parts of the continent, in the Horn of Africa, in the Sahel region, and if you look at the rise of extremism, it's linked to the dwindling of the available resources due to climate change. The loss of water resources as well as arable land is leading to conflict among communities and in a larger scale between countries. Conflict already is a huge child protection issue, so you can imagine the confluence of conflict and climate worsens the situation for children. One other thing highlighted by the study is that we have various climate events, slow onset and disaster events that we speak of. But when it comes to Africa, there's a need to prioritize droughts and floods because these are the most, in terms of the sheer impact on children and the number of children impacted by this, the countries impacted by this. These are the two climate events that need to be prioritized in Africa in relation to children. Out of 19.7 million child displacements due to floods throughout the world, Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, Nigeria are top 10 globally. And 1.3 child displacements which took place due to droughts in Somalia, Ethiopia, Angola, Burundi, Madagascar and South Sudan from 2017 to 2021. and these are the top 10 countries globally, the countries that I mentioned. These African countries are top 10 globally. So because of this reason, there is a need to prioritize these two events. The study also highlights how these different impacts are connected with the rights of children under the Charter. As we know, the Charter has obligations for African governments, and these are binding obligations. So this means that when we address climate change, we have a legal tool, a binding legal tool that we can use to discuss with our governments to ensure that children are prioritized in those actions. I also want to highlight that the African Charter on the Rights of the Child, when it talks about the right to education, explicitly mentions that the education of a child shall be directed to, among many other things, the development of respect for the environment and natural resources. The children have spoken a lot about the inclusion of climate change in the curriculum. We have a legal basis for that. The Charter tells us. I'm talking too fast, I was told, so I will slow down. So we have a legal basis for reforming curriculum to incorporate children climate education within the curriculum. When it comes to the challenges in climate action in Africa, the study tells us there are various challenges, but I would like to focus on challenges related to financing, because that's the theme of the ACS. There is insufficient finance in general to coming to Africa, with only 5% of global adaptation fund reaching the continent. There is a huge gap in adaptation finance, and adaptation, as the Child Champion indicated, the 1.12 High campaign tells us that we need to adapt, we need to ensure that we prioritize adaptation, both in the action plans we come up with, but also in the financing. But as it stands now, there's much more focus and financing on mitigation or reduction of greenhouse gases. But what we need is actually to prioritize adaptation, building resilient schools, building resilient communities, ensuring that essential services are protected from the climate impact. But that is not happening. What's happening is that because the investment coming from the global north is focusing on mitigation, we are not prioritizing adaptation. Just to give you a highlight, the implementation cost of nationally determined contributions of 51 African countries represents 93% of Africa's GDP. So this is the burden on African countries when we have very little financing coming on adaptation, and when the actual need amounts to 93% of Africa's GDP. You can imagine the gap in financing. It's tremendous, and even the small financing is not going to adaptation. Africa received only 2% of global investment in renewable energy in the past 2 decades. Only 2%. So these are the things that the study highlights when it comes to financing. It also highlights the debt crisis. A lot of African countries are in a debt crisis, and the debt crisis makes financing for climate very complicated. So there's just a cycle of debt financing, and then when climate finance comes, it comes in the form of debt itself. And that's another huge problem. It's not coming in grants, it's not coming in other ways, in concessional loans, but in debt. It's increasing to the already existing debt crisis. So these are the challenges highlighted, and the recommendations were given in relation to those challenges. And I will not go through the recommendation because I want you to look at the study, and I also want you to take a copy of the child-friendly version. It just means a very simplified and easy to understand version, so you will get the main recommendations in there. But I would like to just highlight one recommendation, which is the declaration of climate emergency. A lot of countries in the world, in Asia, in Europe, and in the Americas, have declared climate emergency. But the climate crisis affects Africa disproportionately, and especially African children much more disproportionately. But not a single African country has declared a climate emergency yet. And we have called for declaration of climate emergency in countries which are most affected by the crisis in Africa. This will help us mobilize funding, raise the agenda to the highest policy levels, and galvanize stronger government action. So we have recommended the declaration of climate emergency. So I will stop here, and I invite all of you to look at the study on our website, as well as the child-friendly version here, printed here. But next, I would like to invite another speaker, as I said, from Amnesty International, Mr. Chico Wachiko, who will speak to us about rights-based climate financing, and will also tell us a bit more about child displacement related to the climate crisis.